So I would like to invite the participants of our panel discussion. Mr. Artem Rybchuk, the Deputy Minister for Community and Territorial Development of Ukraine. Ellen Hamilton, Lead Urban Specialist, World Bank. Mr. Grzegorz Gajda, Senior Urban Development Specialist, the European Investment Bank. Please, if you are present right now. Anastasia Baklan, Helvetas, Ukraine. David Aubrey, UN Habitat for Ukraine. Mr. Igor Guda, Creator Boot. Yevgen Metzger, I can already see you, the chairman of Ukrfinžitlo. And we also have Yulia Shevchuk, Nefco Ukraine. So everybody's present, as I can see. So we'll speak about the housing policy. A few words about me. I have a working experience in real estate market for more than 13 years. I worked in the largest construction company in Ukraine. Right now, I am head of the Committee on Development, CBU, working with different programs, but mostly private sector. So as a representative of business sphere, of course, I would like to focus on current situation with social housing, with the demand for housing, the volume of construction in Ukraine, the issues that both the government, the communities, and the private sector see. Just a few words about the current state so that we start our discussion. We know that almost 4 million people right now are internally displaced. We know that there is huge demand for housings nowadays in Ukraine. We have millions of square meters damaged and destroyed buildings. On one hand, we have a historical shortage of social housing, and we have lack of governmental funding. We have issues connected with safety, with volumes of construction. On the other hand, we have private sector that is willing to participate, different governmental programs, public-private partnerships, maybe. And we need to seek some incentives and ways how to involve private sector. We can also see that right now we have some programs, governmental programs that support demand and supply for housings that help to fulfill the need for most vulnerable categories of our population. But still, there are many issues to be solved. The issues connected with bureaucratic barriers, with the land market, with some legislation. So that is why we would like to discuss the point of view of our participants, maybe some ideas and offers what must be done in the at the first steps. So I would like to give the word to Artem, to our Deputy Minister, as a brief introduction. Artem, I would like to ask you about what do you see as the strategic tasks of the government today to deal with the problem of the housing policy? How do you think, which steps should be fulfilled as the first stage? Which are the current activities and ideas that you are planning to implement?
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, Ukrainians, friends of Ukraine. My big pleasure to be this evening with you, or this day. First of all, when we talk about housing, when we talk about recovery, when we talk about building, we think about people. And today we have around 13% of our house stock damaged fully or partly, but in general we're talking about 2.5 million people. Behind each number, it's the name, it's the history, it's the face of a person, and it's the families, and we're talking about different regions of Ukraine. First of all, it's about the front line and the borderline regions. We talk about 11 regions in our country that bordering Russia or Belarus. In this case, we understand that we have around 5 million internally displaced people which means that we need to support them as the state. And of course, for the president of Ukraine, for the government, it's a priority to support our people, to support our nation. At the same time, we understand that we have to have our people back home, and we have, as the state, to provide this opportunity. When we talk about build back better, we understand that we give the hope for tomorrow for our people, and this is not just to talk, it's not just a response or some kind of statement. These are the practical steps that have to be done. That's why we're focusing on very practical and quick, on the one hand, issues when we talk about fast recovery process, but we also talk about the long-lasting strategies. So we're coming up with comprehensive approaches, and this is the strategy of the rebuild and recovery of our country. And this is not just to build a house, it's about to have a hospital, to have a school and a kindergarten, to have the energy system running, to have the heating and transportation. So it's a really comprehensive vision how the state has to support our nation, our people. And of course, we are thankful to our international partners, because without them it would not be possible. We are thankful not only for financial support, but we're also thankful for the, let's say, best practices that we receive. Also, we understand that our country is big, actually the biggest by territory if we take the borders of 1991 and later on, but still we talk about also the projects and programs that are in force, for example, e-recovery, e-Osela. This is the programs where we respond to our people, to first of all our veterans who come back from the front, from the war, and this is also the support to the families of the heroes that gave their lives to protect Europe, as well as not about only Ukraine, but we talk about democracy and rule of law. That's what we are standing for and fighting for almost 4 years now, as the full-scale aggression. But we understand that more to go, more to be recovered. That's why the more tools we produce as the ideas, and of course it was just mentioned, different digitalization programs, different reforms. Also we talk about legislation, which is important to be as a ground for all the steps that we do. So in generally, we try to be open to private sector. We try to hear them very quickly and to respond to them as well, because we understand that without the private sector it would not be possible to go forward and to realize all what we have. But we have really practical instruments. Also the State Agency for Recovery was created, I would say, especially to adopt the projects on the ground. So this is very shortly, but hopefully I have covered some of the issues what are being done, but it's really a work of 24/7 and it's not a non-stop job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have one video guest. I would like to give the word to Deputy Minister of Communities and Territorial Development, Natalia Kozlovska. She will also speak about modern approaches while developing the new housing policy for Ukraine, the current issues that the ministry is dealing with, the current state of social housing in our country, maybe some statistics and the key factors that must be taken into account while discussing and developing the new programs for Ukraine. So please, if we are ready, Alexander.
Шановні колеги, партнери, учасники форуму. Житлова політика України сьогодні стоїть перед безпрецедентними викликами. Повномасштабна війна зруйнувала не лише мільйони квадратних метрів житла, вона оголила слабкі місця системи, яка десятиліттями залишалась незмінною. За оцінками RDNA-4, понад 13% житлового фонду, а це більш як 2,5 мільйона домогосподарств, втратили житло. А понад 4,5 мільйона людей залишаються внутрішньо переміщеними. Це не просто статистика, це історії родин, які вже третій рік поспіль живуть у тимчасових рішеннях без сталого рішення. Ця реальність – виклик, але водночас і шанс. Шанс закласти нову основу для житлової політики. Справедливої, сталої, орієнтованої на людей і на сучасні європейські підходи. Ми не можемо далі спиратись на старі моделі. Вони були складними, зарегульованими, часто непрозорими і вразливими до зловживань. Вони не відповідають темпам і масштабам відновлення, яке потребує країна. Сьогодні ми створюємо абсолютно нову філософію житлової політики. Це робота в двох напрямках – комплексний перегляд політики через зміну законодавства і реалізація практичних проєктів відновлення житла та житлових прав громадян. В рамках плану Ukraine Facility ми реалізуємо 7-му реформу забезпечення доступу до житла для тих, хто того потребує. Триває робота над розробленням національної житлової стратегії, документа, який має закласти основу для всієї майбутньої політики у сфері житла. Ця стратегія – не декларація з абстрактними обіцянками, не перелік намірів на папері. Це чітко структурований план дій, який базується на аналізі реальних потреб населення, розуміння фінансових можливостей держави і громад, а також на партнерстві з міжнародними інституціями. Уже розроблений і схвалений у першому читанні законопроект про основні засади житлової політики кажуть, що перший крок найважливіший, але саме він визначає напрямок. Цей законопроект – наша перша, але ключова лінія на карті нової житлової політики. Він окреслює правила, пріоритети, ставить крапку в старих підходах і починає нову історію, базуючись на кращих європейських практиках, а також готується закон про соціальне житло, який дозволить сформувати прозору, справедливу і фінансово життєздатну систему. Ми усвідомлюємо, що це непростий шлях, адже іноді, щоб створити нове, доводиться ламати застаріле. І це природно викликає спротив, іноді непорозуміння. Але ми рухаємося вперед. І цей рух незворотній. Житлова реформа охоплює кілька ключових напрямок – розвиток соціального та орендного житла, залучення приватного капіталу і міжнародної підтримки, децентралізація повноважень і, відповідно, посилення ролі громад, створення єдиної житлової інформаційної системи. Це цілісний механізм, і ми прагнемо не просто вирішувати проблеми точково, а створити нову житлову політику, яка працює як система. Ми щиро вдячні нашим міжнародним партнерам, які разом з нами на цьому шляху. Не чекаючи завершення реформи, ми активно працюємо в напрямку реальних проєктів. Одним з дієвих механізмів відновлення житла, яке було пошкоджено внаслідок збройної агресії, є програма компенсації, яку ми реалізуємо спільно з Світовим банком. Програму компенсації за зруйноване житло ми реалізуємо у співпраці з Банком розвитку Ради Європи, яка важливою складовою державної політики у відновленні житлових прав громадян. Окремий важливий напрямок – це проект відновлення багатоквартирних житлових будинків, який ми також реалізуємо спільно зі Світовим банком. Він базується на кластерному методі, що дозволяє нам не просто ремонтувати окремі будівлі, а комплексно відновлювати мікрорайони, які спільно користуються інфраструктурою, максимізуючи ефективність від вирахування високих стандартів енергоефективності, кліматичної стійкості і інклюзивний підхід, враховуючи потреби вразливих груп населення. Спільно з Європейським інвестиційним банком ми працюємо в напрямку започаткування проекту будівництва соціального житла в Україні. Ми плануємо створити і реалізувати нову програму на основі європейських стандартів. Ми відкриті і запрошуємо всіх партнерів долучитися до цього проекту. Для внутрішньопереміщених осіб працюють кредитні інструменти, такі як «Є-оселя» та проект «Житло для ВПО». Цей проект направлений для ВПО, що мають дохід нижче середнього. Ми масштабували програму кредитування ВПО під мінімальні 3% річних. Даний проект реалізує Держмолоджитло за рахунок залучених міжнародних коштів. Першим донором проекту став німецький банк розвитку КФВ, який вже виділив 42 мільйона євро і нещодавно погодив збільшення фінансування ще на 33. В поточному році до проекту долучився Банк розвитку Ради Європи, надавши додаткові 50 мільйонів євро кредитного ресурсу. Програма є унікальна, адже створює мінімальне навантаження на державний бюджет. Виконавець програми гарантує повернення залучених державою коштів з платежів отримувачів пільгового кредиту. За всіма цими цифрами стоять тисячі українських родин, які попри все залишаються відданими своїй країні, залишаються тут, працюють на відновлення економіки та захист нашої держави. Ми вдячні всім міжнародним партнерам, донорам і інвесторам за співпрацю, за віру в нас, за віру в реформу і Україну. Шановні учасники форуму, кожен з вас має власний досвід, бачення, пропозиції. Ми щиро розраховуємо на відкриту дискусію. Цей форум – це майданчик для обміну думками, можливість спільно сформувати важливі рішення. Ми готові чути всіх і враховувати думки, а спільними зусиллями створити справді дієву житлову політику, яка відповідатиме сучасним викликам і наближує Україну до європейських стандартів і якості житлової політики. Дякую за увагу, плідної усім роботи.
So let's go back to our participants who are present here, and before I will give floor to our international experts, I would like to invite Mrs. Anastasia, because she presented very interesting analytical data. What is the condition of the housing situation? What are the critical areas for our country? Please present the slideshow from Ms. Anastasia, and we will also listen to the ways of solving these challenges. Thank you so much, Anna. Dear partners, it is very nice to be here with you. I will present you with information about the housing in Ukraine. Our discussion confirms that there were very big problems in our country, but still we are working together with the state authorities, the local organizations to reform housing policy of Ukraine. Very briefly, what we are doing, we are Havels Swiss Intercooperation International organization that provides initiatives for sustainable development. We work in different countries of Ukraine. We have offices in Kyiv and Kharkiv. Our portfolio is basically infrastructure recovery, especially in the frontline areas. We are developing workforce market and working in the area of vocational training. We are cooperating with the key ministers and agencies to reform the aspects related to economic development. We are cooperating with Switzerland, Sweden, Czech Republic, United Kingdom, and Italy. If we speak about the situation in the area of reforming and social housing in Ukraine, we are cooperating with the Ministry of the Development of Communities in order to improve it. We are working in circular and sustainable construction. And the figures that were mentioned by our speakers, around 13% of housing in Ukraine has been destroyed according to the World Bank data. And if we compare it to the Ukrfin Житло, so basically 600 million square meters are needed for people in Ukraine. So this work is of utmost importance. And so answering the challenges together, Helvas and social housing Institute, we have prepared a few researches in the area of social housing reform and also prefabricated housing. And today we want to show you the results of the first research in the area of social housing. I liked all the previous speeches because the question that we are facing is basically a shift in our philosophy when we speak about social housing. First of all, in Ukraine, we have an out-of-date regulations. We have the housing residential code that was adopted a long time ago, and also basically an attitude to social housing. A lot of people see social housing as something non-profitable, but there are questions: how can it be interesting and attractive to private companies? So we analyzed international practice to know how to make this segment attractive for private sector. So what do we have now? According to the data, 89% of territorial communities do not have social housing. Only 164 from more than 1,400 territorial communities in Ukraine have this type of housing. So they cannot accept internally displaced people. So basically, this, if you speak about social housing, we have to understand that this is the housing that will be used long term, on the long term basis, by vulnerable groups of people. We have leaders in social housing. These are three communities: Kremenchutska, Mykolaievska, and Zalachivska. And we see that as of now, 2,550 people are living over there, and 42% of them are orphan children. Why do we have such a situation? Because social housing basically was provided to, first of all, this vulnerable group, even before the war. We understand that this situation requires some new answers and new solutions. We can see on the map of Ukraine an indicator of accessibility of housing, and we have to understand that not many people have used social housing, but some people who have lost their houses, lost their works, who were forced to move to other territories, they need this. And so we understand that in most cases, people who have some profits, have some resources, they try to rent on the private market. And so this is the question. But how accessible, affordable is this housing market, private housing market? We know that a lot of a big segment of housing market is a shadow market. Quite often people do not have their rights protected, no agreements are concluded, and therefore there are some consequences which are very bad to these people. So we should understand that this indicator of house accessibility, this is a correlation between the average income and payment for housing, house rent. So if we have 22,000 hryvnias per month, which is an annual payment, but the payment for the rent is around 15,000, of course not per month, of course not in the center of Kiev. So the housing is considered accessible if this indicator is not more than 30%. So if we are looking at the map, where do we have these indicators which are lower than 30%? These are only the territories close to the front line. But if you look at the regions which are considered more or less safe on the territory of western regions, we can look at the Uzhhorod and Lviv, and we see the indicator at the level of 89 or 82%. These are terrible figures. They show that we have to solve these problems. They are so difficult, and the housing is not accessible to people. So what are the models in the European experience? And we have basically tried to introduce this philosophy into the documents that we are working on, and now we are elaborating a law of Ukraine about the basis of housing policy and on the social housing, and it changes the philosophy of social housing. So basically we are moving away from providing a free housing to the model of a cheaper rent. So it should not be a loss to private sector, but now there is emerging a market of operators of housing.
To receive some tax stimuli and additional possibilities of investing in next rent is twice as slower as the market rate. And in case of some vulnerable social group, it would be recompensated by the government and the state budget. So we want to make housing economically effective yet accessible. Moreover, this would allow to make the housing distribution transparent. So we're so delighted to say that the European partners get involved to this project, especially the EBRD and other international finance organizations. But we understand the necessity to make it to translate into a real life instead of keeping that on paper only. You could. So this study is available, but also a training program for these public servicemen was implemented, and dozens of people had already, 80 civil servants have undergone this training program. Also, pilot programs are being introduced. We have just finished our cooperation with Divario, Swiss company, in order to launch a project on manufacturing and putting up modular housing buildings. It is estimated to create more than 300 modular houses, providing simultaneously more than 50 jobs. Of course, in compliance with all the European green standards. We are open for cooperation in the Swiss stand, also in our offices in Kiev and Kharkiv. So it is so important to make business on the same time, providing meeting the issues that vulnerable people face.
Delivered each year, which means we'll need to spend 60 years to cover this 600 million necessary social housings. I would like to give the word to David. We discussed with you that to find a solution for these issues, to develop efficient new programs, find an economically sound way of ensuring reconstruction, rebuild of Ukraine, and provide internally displaced people with a place to work, to live, to stay inside Ukraine, ensure the recovery of our country. We need to view the general profile for Ukraine and see the main bottlenecks which constrain the development of the construction sector, which have a negative impact on the current situation, and further steps to be made. So I would like to ask your opinion. How do you think which sectors must have the leading role in this process? taking into account the European and world experience, what should be done here to cover this demand for social and affordable housings as the first task?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak here. UN Habitat's very committed to Ukraine and to supporting the recovery of Ukraine, and we hope that this will happen quickly and we will reach the end of where we're at now and to a more positive future as Ukraine becomes a European member state. And I think what's really important when we're looking at housing is to zoom out. We talk about a lot of displaced people, a huge amount of destruction, and it is quite tempting just to focus on this, but if we're able to zoom out, I think this will help to frame where we need to go with housing. So the future of Ukraine is the future, is the integration within European economies. And I think it's very important to understand how does that affect the territorial landscape of Ukraine. What kind of economies are we expecting to participate in? What will be the role of cities within these economies? What will be the value chains as we link with European economies? What kind of investments are we aiming to attract where? This will have an important impact then, and as we heard earlier, from the private sector, they want to also start to understand where are they going to be investing as they invest in private partnerships, industrial partnerships, etc. So I think the key thing we need to start doing now is to have a forward-looking national spatial plan for Ukraine that looks at what will be the future economy and how does that affect the cities, the human settlements and the corridors that exist in Ukraine. This will mean that certain cities will grow. It'll probably mean that some other cities might shrink. But what does that tell the IDPs? Currently, you can see the IOM figures updated quite regularly based on what are their intentions for the future. But if IDPs and other people who are not IDPs know where the future economies of Ukraine going to sit and what are the roles of the cities and how does that align with their interests, this will also help them to understand where they want to move. And where people want to move will then identify where the pressure points are for housing and where we should be focusing our attention. So I think the spatial understanding, and quite often when we're looking at the housing policies, the housing profiles, we're not understanding enough about the spatialization of it, where the demands are, and how that aligns with the future of Ukraine and the future economies that are linked with European economies. I think the second thing we need to understand is that housing is always implemented as a diversity of options. So yes, indeed, there is private ownership, but also as people start thinking about the future, maybe rental is important. Maybe young people might want to move to a city where they might be involved in the tech industry or some new industries that are coming up. So maybe the rental market might expand. It might be a springboard into the future. It might also be a shock absorber for where we are now and where we want to be moving to. Of course, housing policy has often been about how can the role of the state enable the housing sector to work. But often when we just focus that on the private sector, we've found in the last 2 decades that there is always a missing gap. There are always people who are vulnerable, and there are always people who need support. I think we need to understand that in a far more nuanced way. There's limited funding to go around, so we have to be very careful with subsidies. And to be careful with subsidies, we really have to have a nuanced understanding of vulnerability. Not all IDPs are vulnerable. Not all people who are not IDPs are vulnerable either. So we need to really understand vulnerability in a nuanced way. And there will be a need for social housing. And it's great to hear the announcement just now that the social housing law is now in place, and the announcement earlier that the EIB is going to be implementing a social housing program. This is really important, but it's very important that anything that's subsidized is very well targeted, so that's giving account of the limited funding, public funding that must be available. I think the third thing then is within this broad scope, and we hopefully will be hearing later from Ellen about the different types of housing, about a typology of housing. We need to understand then the enabling environment. The private sector housing, I'm sure digitization is going to, even the permitting processes needs to be streamlined. Currently, the information that you need to make a planning permit is not all in one place, and this could be digitized, aligned with the land system, so that if you are permitting, you have access to all that information. This is something that needs to happen, and digitization can really help in this regard. There are other, and I'm sure Ellen will also cover some other areas that it needs to be unlocked to enable better private sector investment. In the rental market, it's going to be really important to regulate the rental market. So that's going to be another enabling factor, protecting the interest of both renters and owners so that rent is affordable and tenure is secure. We need to look at the apartment buildings. There's a huge need to renovate. We were hearing earlier about the European standards. There's going to be a need to renovate and to improve energy standards. But then that requires an enabling framework so that the ownership, the management of these multi-apartment buildings works effectively so that you can invest in it in a more coordinated and streamlined way. There's a need to review subsidies. As we move into Europe, there's going to be the need to look at state aid and other rules as well. So we need to be thinking about where we're moving towards and creating enabling frameworks that align with European policy. I think the fourth point then is within this framework of a broad range of housing options, the pathways to achieving it, the spatial understanding of the future of Ukraine, there's a need to come to the localized level so that the housing needs, the housing opportunities are identified then locally. And then lastly, there needs to be then within a typology of housing solutions, national support programs that can support local authorities to implement these. And with that, financing pathways and technical support. So I'll leave it there. And just to finalize, I think the next step then from our point of view would be to have a spatial framework, a spatial development framework for Ukraine, for looking into the future, and then the housing profile, which then helps you to understand how to implement the strategy, because the housing profile puts all of that information into one place. It helps to understand the legislation, the regulations, what's needed so that you can implement the strategy. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I actually agree that the population must have several options. Not all housing must be privately owned. There must be some governmental, public housing fund. There must be a chance to have something for rent if you can't afford buying your own housing. So that is true. I am sure that Ellen will add to this speech because you've been studying the market for a long time. You know many issues, for example, this land situation, how it works in Ukraine completely differs from what happens in Europe and US. I also know that you always stress the meaning of the private sector, but maybe we shouldn't be speaking only about new construction. What about repairing and reconstructing the buildings that are now damaged? What can be done in this direction? So please give us your opinion.
I was just looking for this. Okay, thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be on this panel, and I hope I will be contributing to advancing the conversation and not repeating the excellent wisdom from the earlier panel members. Maybe just briefly, we're talking a little bit about this problem. Millions of internally displaced. I think the numbers may be a little out of date now. But in addition, you have a lot of people who have been injured, who are disabled. You have some number of people among the IDPs who are employed, but most of them are not. You have many single-parent households, and you have a lot of housing destruction. We should also remember that there's also a number of pre-existing challenges, and we should not forget these people because as Ukraine moves to long-term solutions, it will be very important for these longer-term programs to also take into account the pre-existing challenges. Specifically, there were very high rates of overcrowding. There were 50,000 homeless people. This is prior to the war, prior to 2022. There were huge numbers of people on these municipal waiting lists, which is one of the fundamental aspects that the government is currently trying to address. So if you think about this very simply, what simply can you do? There's actually really only 4 ways to increase housing supply, and I've put them in order by the cost per unit and the time to do. The first thing is you can bring vacant units into use, little cost, short term, and in fact, there has been a lot of this. This is all the IDPs who are in rental housing. They're renting vacant units, often from the original owners. So the second thing you can do, and we heard some about that this morning, is you can repair damaged units. There's a program of small repairs, which is very quick implementing and quite low cost. I think the big challenge for all of us is the apartment buildings. But even repairing medium damaged apartment buildings is actually far less expensive and takes less time than building new. A third option is to repurpose existing buildings, for example, hostels. And this is also, I would say, less expensive than building new, but it does take some time. Finally, there is the opportunity, and there will be a need that's clear for new construction, but we should also recognize that this is both the most expensive option and it also takes the most time. So those are sort of the 4 different things you can actually do concretely to increase housing supply. And I think that what Ukraine needs is not one or the other, but actually a mix, because you will notice that these work in the short term, the medium term, and the longer term. And I think Ukraine needs to be structuring its upcoming housing strategy exactly on this. When we think about constraints, so subsidies are often used to overcome inefficiencies in the market. And we would like to suggest that given the huge requirements here, we should all be interested in making the market work as well as possible so that the subsidies will reach more people who actually need it. And when we think about the supply, so how you get new housing supply, it starts with gaining access to land. I think there's an issue on land, especially urban land here, and the way builders or developers are acquiring it is not with full property rights, and that much reduces the value of the land in terms of, for example, being able to be used as collateral. It also makes it very difficult to use mechanisms like land value capture. Of course, what you can use the land for matters a lot. So, and I know that this is another big area where there's some work to be done with the urban planning in particular. Off-site infrastructure, developers need to be able to be sure that they can connect their development or their building to services. The whole organization of the construction sector, I think we're here with the experts in that. I think that there's probably also sort of emerging needs in this, including, for example, builders right now or developers are often in the situation of financing their developments through pre-sales of apartments, which, just like we were discussing some of the problems with informal rental, there's also a lot of risks and uncertainties around these pre-planned sales. And as a result, it also creates additional costs for developers and additional risks. And one of the noteworthy things about Ukraine is that the amount of formal finance flowing into construction, so construction finance, which is normally what a developer would do, is very low here. much lower than in other countries. And pre-planned sales is very high. The question of how you subsidize, I think we talked about. And then also, I think we're going to talk later about end-user finance. But end-user finance, particularly, you do want your end-user finance to not be purely subsidized, particularly in the longer term. And so I think the challenge for Ukraine is how you move from the current situation to a situation where you have a well-functioning mortgage market that is not heavily subsidized by government, and then that opens up the opportunity for government to help in the affordable sector with home acquisition through some sort of smart subsidies, which would also be very, very important. I think we had talked about a few of these things, but this is the moment where at this early stage, the government's at this early stage in the housing strategy, and to think through some of the issues that I just talked about in terms of how to make this value chain for housing supply work more efficiently. Because if it works more efficiently, it will cost less. And if it costs less, then more housing can be delivered. Also to note that there's, I think, room for the private sector in all types of housing supply, and they relate also to this relates also to the enabling environment. But the law, the strategy, these are some of the key factors. The supply, we talked a little bit about land plots, but also I think there's other, this question of urban planning, for example, which seems to be a big impediment. The registration of land plots, all of these kinds of things. And then we talked a little bit about some of the ways that you could be already now improving the regulatory framework and the way the market works to support market mortgage finance, for example, as well as other kinds of regulations that will be helpful for demand. So thank you very much. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for your speech. A very deep investigation to these questions. Grzegorz, I know that you have an alternative point of view because we discussed before today's panel, you see great importance in the public sector. Everything is okay?
Sorry, I will just apologize because I have to run for the next session.
Okay.
But thank you very much for your attention, dear colleagues. Thank you for the support, and let's bring, the humanity and the respect back. Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. Thank you very much. So, returning to our topic, Grzegorz, you told me that you see great influence and importance of public sector, some charity institutions while developing the new housing policy. But I would also like to ask you a question. On one hand, we need to think about new construction. We need to think about developing the social housing fund for internally displaced people, for people who need the housing temporary or steady solution. But on the other hand, as a business representative, I can tell you that right now we have a huge housing stock in the private sector. Lots and lots of apartments in existing ready buildings, which are not sold, of course, because the demand dropped dramatically from the beginning of war. And right now you can easily find like 50–60% unsold apartments in the existing buildings. And the question here is, how the private sector can be involved. Maybe we should not focus on building something new right now. Maybe we should use the resources and the funding from the private sector. Maybe some furnishing or fit out for the existing lots that we already have in the market. What is your opinion? What should be done, and how to find this proper match, the balance between the public sector, the social institutions, the private sector, and all the participants of this process?
Thank you. And this is actually a very good question. And I will like to say that so the institution that I represent, European Investment Bank, which is Bank of European Union, has been financing housing projects for decades in European Union, and we financed about 60 billion euro of projects in the last 15 years in very well developed markets for public housing, which are mainly countries of Western and Northern Europe. And this is where we bring our knowledge from, and that's the knowledge that we'd like to share with Ukraine in the context of Ukraine's recovery. So wherever we go, I mean, every single European city, but also it is true to every single city outside of European Union, the picture is always more or less the same. When you take a population of every city and you create an income distribution of this population, you always have this kind of a bell curve. And what we can see is that people who are on the right-hand side of that bell curve can afford housing in that city, and the people who are on the left-hand side of the bell curve, they cannot. And it's a phenomenon which is present everywhere. And this is basically a reason why there is a need for housing, which is provided in a different way than on a market basis. Now, why it is so important? And I will have to tell you, this is a little bit a longer story, so I have to be brief, be quick. So let's get focused. I mean, if you have a situation that you cannot afford a house in the city, you will be looking for a house outside. And this is what happens when people cannot find a house in the city. They look 10 kilometers, 20, 30, sometimes even 50 kilometers away from the city. And then they get that housing, obviously, because market can always deliver. And then what happens is that these people live there 50 kilometers away from the city, and they ask for school, for road, for internet connection, for electricity, for gas, for public transport, for culture, for shopping, for everything. And for work, but okay, they probably go to the city for work because that's why they move there in the first place. This cost of providing all these services to these people who acquired housing far away from the city is called suburbanization. It's something that is a plague of Central and Eastern Europe. And all this extra infrastructure costs very often a couple of times more than the housing itself. So that is why the cities, from this point of view, may want to build this housing and not spend double or triple amount on bringing all this necessary infrastructure to far away areas. Now, when there is a private situation, private sector, private supply, private demand, the market, I think, I don't know, I'm educated in a classical economics, the market would bring the price to an equilibrium level, and whatever is supplied should find the buyer. Now, if this housing cannot be sold, they probably are other than market reasons why this housing cannot be sold. And these reasons have to be identified, and maybe there should be a solution for them. But normally, the market should be a solution for it. So my point is that there is a natural situation of housing sector that requires that substantial amount of people cannot afford housing on a market basis due to their low income or due to their income being low compared to what is available in the city. And this is a phenomenon of cities that are successful, okay? So here we are in Warsaw, and Warsaw is a very successful city. And I can tell you that people whom I know who used to be able to afford housing, they cannot afford housing today because this city became so successful. There are so many new people who come with good incomes that they cannot, the prices went up and they pushed out a lot of people away from affordability situation. So that is this is what's happening in Western Ukrainian cities. I mean, they become successful not because of their own policy, but because of the situation that they are far away from the front line, right? So yeah, that is my answer. I don't know if it is very clear, but that is why this has to be happening. Thank you.
And how do you think, just one more question, about social housing for the most vulnerable categories of population? Is there a chance so that we have both public social housings and maybe private social housings, maybe with less margin for the companies who operate these types of housing, so that we can rely not only on international support and international aid, but also the funding from the private sector and the resources of our own domestic investors, because the Ukraine's population our people, they're actually the most important investors right now because they have a chance to develop the construction sector.
So, what theoretically is possible, I'd rather not speculate. I focus on what actually happens in European Union countries, which have more than 100 years of history in this sector. And one important thing to say is that actually, and this is maybe contrary to popular belief, in Western European countries, most of public housing is actually funded with private savings of population or with money raised on capital markets. But this is done in a smart way. And it is done in such a way that makes it possible to obtain this financing at very low cost and transform this financing to very long-term loans. These loans are given from 25 to 40 years, or sometimes even 50 years, and they are all sourced not from public sector funds, but from private sector funds. So capital markets and population is the main source of financier of all this big public housing sector in Europe. It's big because it's 20% of all the housing in Europe. It's where 100 million Europeans live, and it is mainly financed by private sector financing. But it's financed in such a way that the providers of this financing are actually a mission-oriented, socially oriented institutions whose job, whose reason of existence is to deliver social objective. They are non-profit institutions, meaning they don't distribute profit to their owners, but they can actually earn a profit on this activity, but they are obliged to reinvest this profit in their growth, in construction of new additional units or renovation of old existing units. And this is that model that assumes that the profit gets accumulated in the sector that has been a cornerstone of the success of that European sector of public housing. It creates a possibility for the sector to operate on a counter-cyclical basis. It makes it possible to lend, for my institution, for example, to those providers for 25 years with zero margin, because these institutions are very often AAA rated because of their high capitalization. And that's how it grew, that's how it works. So, of course, everything which will be built, I mean, the construction works itself will 100% be done by private sector. But it is important to understand that for this particular group, it has to operate on a non-profit basis in order to accumulate the profits for future growth and reinvestment. That has been the practice, and I think it's worked quite well. Because when we look at statistics in European Union, various statistics, housing affordability, but also the statistics that I like the most, which is when a person statistically leaves their parent household. When you look at countries that have well-developed public housing sector, young people leave their parents early. And when they don't have this, they stay with their parents until the age of 35 sometimes, which we don't want, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Пане Ігорю, ви як системний девелопер, як представник будівельної спільноти України.
As a representative of the construction industry of Ukraine, I'll give you a few seconds to get your interpretation set. So, as a representative of the construction industry of Ukraine, you may be deeply involved in all the issues that are faced by the main players. What are the key issues that could be corrected in in the housing policy? What incentives, what thresholds should be introduced in order to provide social housing pool? And I know that you have some experience in the public-private partnership. Tell us more about that. Yes, indeed. As a representative of the system development, what is a system development in Ukraine? It is a company with strict structure, experience in conducting projects. System development is independent from external funding, since it's provided with its own funds to finish its projects. Unfortunately, because of war, we see, like never before, who works in a systemic way and who is not. Who builds just buildings and who builds the whole, provides a whole standard, a whole infrastructure that we cooperate with local authorities, the government, and the external organizations. The first issue I'd like to point out it's the absence of city plans, or if present, they are rather obsolete and antiquated. Bureaucracy is another issue. Some permit documents would require a lot of time to acquire, which may be incentivizing for constructors who would like to proceed quickly and transparently. Unfortunately, not always underground infrastructure, roads and cables are provided too, which increases the cost, the overall cost of a project. Ever-changing legal framework is another issue, since the investors may be afraid of getting involved for many years without knowing if the law would change or not. In many countries, the permits are permanent after 5 years. In the case of Ukraine, it's not the case, unfortunately. I'd like to tell you a little story we had. We were cooperating with Nefco company. A tender was announced in the city of Ternopil of 8.5 million euro. 1 million euro was supposed to be added by the city council. However, the real estimate on the project constituted 12 million. Nefco agreed that many positions were not taken into account, but it is what it is. And we see that, for instance, Chernivtsi City Council cancelled many tenders, while Ternopil just postponed it. I believe that the proper way of work is like this. Our intention is to build 8.5 million euros worth of housing. What could you propose to us instead of proposing some fixed project of, for instance, 12 that is over budgeted? So I believe that the factor should be directed on the private sector. It was correctly stated that many flats are free now and they could be bought. For a moment, 800 or 1,000 euro is the actual price of housing, of a square meter that would be paid for a flat nowadays. So it's lower than the actual price of building housing. It's very challenging to conduct tenders while not all the components are publicly available, for international partners it is even less understandable, and also the corruptional schemes need to be considered during these projects. Unfortunately, it is impossible to provide the actual estimation on the worth of the land. So, how to make this cooperation more effective according to your program? Are we able to re-establish the whole model considering the surplus we face now? Or maybe other algorithms, other procedures should be introduced in order to make it more comfortable for the international partner and the local authority to, in the end of the day, have the final desired solution. Dear guests, hello. If I may, I will be speaking Ukrainian. First of all, I'll answer this. NEFCO is an international finance organization. We were given a task from the European Union, since we are being financed by the EU, to build better than before. And buying 100,000 apartments could be problematic because of the issues with the contractors. I think it's more appropriate to conduct such a thing for the budgetary financing. In terms of news, we are conducting more than 100 projects. We've recently finished a reconstruction residential housing project in 9 cities, financed by the EU. It was quite successful. A new initiative is being introduced, financed by the EU too, once again in 9 cities, related to new housing projects. Chernivtsi and Chernobyl, mentioned before, are part of this. 40% of our project were finished. We had a very successful case in Lviv. First building was commissioned. The main principle is to build better than before. Energetic independence and the climate resilience. Of course, some of these projects may be paid by the budget or the EU, especially in Lviv. This building was mentioned for the disabled veterans. First inhabitants moved to this building, and these were veterans freed from being prisoners of war, and their feedback was that we finally see what we were fighting for, because they had never seen such apartments. It was very emotional, but depicts what is the actual goal. Also, all our cities received letters indicating that the indicative prices should be applied. So on one hand, we being told that we must ReBuild better than before. But on the other hand, the indicative prices and traditional technologies should be applied. So.
And so, what is the difference between our technologies and traditional technologies? First of all, security. For example, if we look at the shelters, we see that emergency exits are built through reinforced tunnels. So when the building is destroyed, people have a chance to survive. We have reinforced basements and foundations. We have some wide doors in the lifts, elevators, and more space in the apartments. If we speak about energy efficiency, so we decided to build 10% higher than C class. We use solar panels in all our buildings, and this is a step to energy independence. And we think that payments will be cheaper due to the use of this energy technologies, and this is a very strict requirement. Our buildings are provided with furniture and some appliances, home appliances, and so the cost of these houses is a little bit higher than the market price. So our task is not only to build houses, for example, some Soviet-type houses, but to build very good houses for those who survived so much. And these projects are of great importance, and we see unlimited range of opportunities. So cities are being developed, and we see a lot of things going on. Thank you. And to finish our discussion on this, we can say that the program ReOsela is one of the key financial tools to support demand on the market, especially during the first years of war, where so many construction companies stopped their activities. But thanks to this tool, ReOsela is a tool that supports people who previously could not afford any type of housing before. So this is a new pool of potential buyers on the real estate market. So I would like to hear what are the first successes of this program and what are the plans for the next years. Are there any negotiations taking place about extension of funds? Will some parameters of this program be changed? So basically, what are the developments for the future? Can you share? Thank you. Thank you for believing in us. And yes, we would like to say a few positive things. I see how our discussion is going on. The authorities basically say that everything is so nice, and so why are we basically here? But there are also some other aspects, and all the parts involved in all this process, they are involved very strongly. One developer here says how it looks in reality, and what we want our developers to be strong, so that they will be capable of restoring what was destroyed and to cover this deficiency, and the market should balance that. And now, once again, foreign investment institutions, they find some possibilities to support us, and this is so wonderful. But we all know that we have over liquidity in our banking systems. But then why we as Ukrainians cannot use this over liquidity and redirect it to a construction area? I saw in some presentations that portfolio of mortgage market is very high. Developed countries, developed economies have 10%, for example. So we have a very strong mortgage portfolio in our country. And it is comparable to the GDP, annual GDP of our country. So we have underdeveloped market, and of course, no funds from international institutions will cover this gap. So we calculated together with the World Bank and other foreign partners, and around 600 millions of square meters of housing are lacking, and we have to rebuild so many houses, and of 150 millions of square meters were destroyed by Russia Federation. So we need a lot of money, and we will invest 10, 20, 50 millions, but we have to create some scalable projects, so we can ask a foreign bank to build us 100 or 200 apartments, but it will not be enough. So we have to take our own liquidity, our own banks. And so a big request to regulators, to banks, to create a legislation basis so that we can scale up our loan capabilities, not only ask and build, but also use our own funds. I also hope that we have basically three basic tools: mortgage, social housing, rented housing, and something in between. This basic leasing with the opportunity to buy out. But we do not know how it will develop. We have only forecasts. We can use the European experience or the US experience. And we as a company, we researched that the US, Canada, Australia, all the citizens, they love this ownership. And so there is not a strong demand to rent, but Europe likes renting. So there are some places where 50% of houses are rented. And so we have to understand who we are as Ukrainians. What do we prefer? I'm not sure that there are so many. We just ask Ukrainians, do you want to live in a rented apartment for your whole life? I think that not so many Ukrainians will raise their hand. We as Ukrainians, we basically like ownership. We want to have our own apartments. We do not like rented apartments. So we have to have scalable tools, and therefore, once again, banks, liquidity, and the use of things and of possibilities that we have in our country. So we have to use this market of Ukrainian developers. Of course, we need new technologies that we will bring from Poland, Austria, or some other country that will share these technologies with us. But our developers have to rebuild the country, and we will find the funds for that. If you speak about Osela, of course, I can say that this is the successful residential housing program in the country. We, as a company, we have done twice as many mortgages as before. So we have what to be proud of. We have created a transparent digital tool, and this instrument gives an instant reply whether a person can receive a mortgage or no. There is no other tool like that. But we have to fill this product with the funds. Whether do we have these funds? Oh, it's not that easy. There are some funds that are filled with some state bonds, but these are not real money. All those 30 or more billions were found on some open markets. So we are finding these funds on the Ukrainian markets. Now we are appealing to some international markets to engage some cheaper funds and to fill this program with the funds. 21,000 Ukrainian families have received mortgages for 2.5 years. So these are 13,000 children. So we have built more than 1 million square meters of housing, and in such cities as Kamenets-Podilsky. So basically, we have built a new city. So I think this is a big achievement. So I would like to thank to developers, because when we changed the rules of the game and when we said only today you will have only now you will have such conditions, we will give the state funds only to the models that are more transparent, more clear, and that they protect the investors' rights, and therefore these funds will be invested only into these models. I'm grateful to more than 100 developers who said, what we will work according to the new schemes, we will be transparent, and they credited more than 300 projects. Osela through the banks. Some developers guarantee 80% of their sales through Osela. So we are basically creating a demand, and we as a company, we have 97% of mortgage market in Ukraine. 3 years in a row. We feel ourselves not as a financial institution, but a center of competence, because we understand who buys with what money, how many children they have, what meters they want to receive, what do they want to see in their apartment, where do they want to buy, on what floor, how this building should like, how safe, how energy efficient. So we are preparing digests and provide them to the developers, so developers can understand if he wants to build a building in the Dubno city, how much should it cost, how many square meters there should be. So we will do everything we can so that our developers who have agreed to the new rules, who pay twice as many taxes as before, the tax service feels that, because we see that these taxes feel in our budget. It makes me proud. And I'm so very grateful to all the developers who want to stay in our country, who want to stay strong, and who want to be able to rebuild the country altogether. Why am I here? I am here because I want to find the international partners who will believe in this project the way we believe in it, and so that we can engage the funds, so that we can fill in the primary developers market, and in a very transparent way. Thank you so much. Thank you for this expressive speech. And it's really a wonderful thing.
For experience, for your knowledge, for your assistance. We think that, of course, we need to take into account the Ukraine's profile. We need to rely on our own chances to invest money to the construction sector. We need to involve the money of Ukrainian banks and the Ukrainian population, as Evgen said in his speech, because we cannot be fully dependent on international aid. It won't be enough. And of course, we need to take into account the experience of developed countries, Europe, US, regarding to social housing, to different programs that can be used for Ukraine. Of course, as we discussed, land issues, permits, legislation, that is all a big issue to be managed. It really constrains the development of construction sector. And of course, we need to find ways how to ensure efficient private and public partnerships, what should be done so that the programs can really supply enough housings of different types, maybe for rent, maybe for ownership, but still, that is great that we're now discussing this new housing policy, and that we're moving from the past rules, how the market operated, how it was, to some new modern approaches. So thank you very much for the discussion. Thank you for your opinions, for your ideas. I hope that all together with our efforts, we will ensure a quick and efficient recovery. Thank you very much.